I use a 70mm Pro dash cam, but what I'm going to say in this video applies to other dash cams as well. I really like the 70mm Pro. I like the functionality, and the sample images I saw online before I bought it were fantastic. However, the first road trip I did with the dash cam left me very disappointed. I'd driven through some beautiful areas in Phang Nga province in southern Thailand, and I was quite excited about coming home with lots of great footage. But when I looked at my computer, the images had been ruined by all the reflections from the windscreen. Had I been involved in an accident, the images would have been good enough to have proved what happened, but aesthetically they weren't very pleasing at all. Nowadays, whenever we have a problem, the first thing we do is look on the internet. So that's what I did. I wanted to see what other people were doing about windscreen reflection. And it seemed the main suggestion was to fit a circular polarising filter. However, I have quite a strong photography background, and there were certain reasons why I didn't want to do this. Nonetheless, I went ahead and ordered one, even though I was quite reluctant about actually fitting it. Here's the circular polarising filter that I ordered, and if you want to add one to the 70mm Pro, the first problem is the physical attachment. The lens isn't threaded, so you can't simply screw on a filter as you may be able to do with other dash cams. In anticipation of this problem, I also ordered a cheap set of step-up rings. The idea of these is that if you have a camera system with several lenses of different diameters, you don't have to buy different size filters for each lens. You can just buy a big filter, and then you can use these step-up rings to put the big filter onto smaller diameter lenses. So what I was planning to do was just to screw the filter into the step-up ring, maybe to use 2 step-up rings, and then somehow to attach the step-up rings to the camera, maybe using adhesive. It's not ideal, but I couldn't think of another way to do it. However, as I said previously, I'm going to go down a different path, and for the time being I've decided not to add a circular polarising filter. The other problem with CPL filters is the loss of light. And I'm not sure that many people who don't have a photography background will understand this. I've been a keen photographer for many years, and I've used CPL filters in the past. What they do, they cut out light from a certain direction, and you can alter that direction by turning the ring on the filter. And in certain situations they give very pleasing results. If you're doing landscape photography and there's a lot of sky, you can make the sky darker, and you can increase the contrast between the clouds and the sky, and it looks a lot better. There is a loss of light there, but it's not really a problem because your camera is going to be on a tripod, and you just use a longer shutter speed, and it's not a problem at all. However, with a dash cam, it will cause problems. Now, how much light can you actually lose by using a CPL filter? Let me demonstrate. This is a standard photography light meter. Let's turn it on. I've got it set in instant mode, so it's recording the amount of light that falls on this little white dome. If I take a reading without the filter, it tells me I need an aperture of f5. If I put the CPL filter over that little sensor and take another reading, it tells me I need an aperture of 3.2, so I've just lost 1 1/3 stops. When I was testing this earlier, I lost 1 2/3 stops, and some people say that you can lose up to 2 complete stops. Now, if you're not familiar with photography and f-stops, that probably doesn't sound too much, but each f-stop is a halving or doubling of light. So if you lose 1 2/3 stops, 1 1/2 stops, it's a lot of light. Now where I live in Thailand, it's very bright most of the time, and in daytime that's not going to be a problem. Even though I've got a tinted windscreen, and if I use a CPL filter, there's still going to be plenty of light to give a good image. However, at night time that's not going to be the case. It's going to be dark outside, and I'm going to lose an awful lot of light. And what's going to happen is that the camera will go into a high ISO mode, it will make the sensor very sensitive, and that will give me very grainy images. One of the big selling points with the 70mm is it has a lens with a maximum aperture of f1.8, which is actually very fast. But by putting on a CPL filter, you immediately take away that advantage. And that's really the reason why I have chosen not to use the filter, but to try to fix the reflection problems using another method. Having decided against using a CPL filter, I returned to the internet to look for other suggestions. And the second most popular suggestion seems to be to cover all reflective surfaces with a non-reflective material. But this isn't an idea I liked either. Nowadays you can buy custom-made dash mats for cars. But my car is quite old and it's not all that popular where I live, so I can't buy one for this car. So if I wanted to cover the dashboard, I need to do it myself. It would take a long time, it would be very, very fiddly, and it would look awful. So I really don't want to do it. Additionally, when I looked at the images from my road trip, there were reflections from my wife's red backpack in the footwell. So even covering the dash wouldn't cut out all of the reflections. With no more suggestions on the internet, it was time to think of something myself. And as for the reasons I stated previously, I'm really against putting on a circular polarising filter if I can help it. I like the idea of cutting out light, and because the camera has a wide angle lens, the further you go away from the camera, the more light you have to block. So it makes sense to try and block light from as close to the camera as possible. Here's what I came up with. It may go out of focus. The camera has problems focusing on things that are all black because there's no contrast. The design brief, if you can call it that, was to make it as simple as possible, and I didn't want to attach anything to the camera because that would have made it difficult to get the camera out of the car. This material is just corrugated plastic. In Thailand it's called future board. I'm not sure what it might be called elsewhere. My kids use it for school projects and things. It's light, it's fairly rigid, it's easy to cut, and it's cheap. The suction cups came with a pump I bought for my fish pond. I didn't need them at the time, but I just kept them in case they might be useful for something else. And as it turns out, they have come in useful for something else. I simply cut two pieces and then cut a piece of cloth to make a rudimentary hinge, and then glued that to the two pieces. So the idea is that I connect this part to the windshield with the suction cups, and then just this flap just goes underneath the camera. My initial plan was to cover everything with black cloth. So I bought some black cloth, but I've done some experiments already and I don't think it will be necessary. But this is just the first prototype, and if I do have any problems with more reflections, then I might go ahead and cover it with cloth. And here it is installed in the car. Before I installed it, I made sure the camera was on, so I knew that it wasn't in the field of view. I attached one section to the windshield using the suction cups, and the other part just comes up to rest on the bottom of the camera. And I've just used an elastic band to keep it up. It's not the greatest looking of devices, but it was cheap, it was easy to make, and it does the job. I might make another one. This was just the first prototype, but at the moment this one is good to go. All I need to do now is to record some more footage so I can show you how much of an improvement it's made. Firstly, let's look at some footage of how things were before. And in the image you can clearly see reflections of my GPS unit, my rear view mirror, my wife's red backpack in the footwell, the airbag on top of the dash, and other parts of the dashboard. It's really not good. And I was going through some beautiful scenery, and the images were completely ruined by all these reflections. This is the first test using the first prototype, and although the reflections are a lot better, there is still a problem in that you can see the suction cups in the bottom corners of the screen. The lesson I learned here is that when you're checking to see what the camera can see, don't use a display on the back of the camera. use the live view function in the smartphone app. I attempted to fix the problem by moving the device lower down on the windscreen, but as it moved further away from the camera, the reflections reappeared. I knew then that I'd have to make another prototype, a wider one. The first one was about 8 inches wide, and I decided to make another one that was 12 inches wide. Here's the new one in position. It's exactly the same basic design as the old one, but it's about 50% wider. I've stuck the old one to the windscreen just to give you a comparison. And when checking the field of view, it's not a good idea to use the screen on the back of the camera, because although something might not be on the screen, it may be in the video. So it's much better to use the smartphone app, which gives a much more accurate indication of what the camera actually sees. It's still not quite perfect. I've lost a small part of the bottom right corner, so I might have to adjust it slightly. But compared to what I was getting originally, it's a huge improvement. There are no reflections, and now you can really start to see the image quality that the 17mm Pro is capable of. I must be the only person on the internet who doesn't recommend adding a CPL filter to cut down reflections, but I really don't think it's a good idea. With some applications, they're very good, but I don't think they're very good for dashcams. Dashcam manufacturers go through a lot of effort to make their products with fast lenses so you get good nighttime performance. And then people just put a filter on the front of the lens that cuts down the light by more than half. To me, it just doesn't make any sense. Think of it as wearing sunglasses all the time. If you go outside in very bright sunshine, that's fine. If you go back indoors, or if you go out at night, you don't want sunglasses because everything is going to be very dark. And sure, with a dash cam, you could take off the filter at night and put it back on in the daytime. But that's very inconvenient, and that's really not something that you want to be doing. As I've shown, it is possible to cut out reflections without using a CPL filter. So my suggestion will be to use some different methods to try to block out the light, and only to use the CPL filter as a last resort. I hope that's been useful. If it has, please subscribe to my channel, because we small YouTubers need all the support we can get. Thanks for watching, and please come back soon to watch more videos.